I have to thank Renee Pipe so much for shipping them. That was really spectacular because it was a huge job. We have such a big membership and we're so lucky to have such a big membership, but I just want to let you know that it's all due to Renee's amazing efforts. So thank you so much, Renee. So I'm Susan. I was lucky to be at the very first meeting of PMQG in March of 2010. So 11 years ago, it's just very hard to get my head around. And we were very excited as a younger guild to do special projects together. Like this is so now, modern quilting has grown so big, which is amazing. But at the time, I was on the 2012 board, our third year, and we were so lucky to welcome Kathy Miller to our February 2012 meeting, and she graciously offered us Michael Miller's brand new cotton couture fabric for a challenge. So I'd love to kind of tell a story of some of the special guild quilts from that year that I'm labeling, and then also teach you all my tips and tricks for doing labels, and anything I can troubleshoot with you or demystify, I'd be thrilled to. So I'll go ahead and does anybody have any questions just to get before we get started? Anything quick about what we'll go over materials and like tips and ideas, but anything you're dying to ask first?
No questions, but just for no judgment, I'm 3 hours ahead of you guys, so I'm having wine.
Oh, well, I think that sounds very nice.
It's 9 o'clock here. So.
Yay!
And
Well,
if you don't
enjoy.
want to interrupt Susan, you can put a message, comment in the chat, and we will get that to her.
Thank you. And yes, please enjoy that wine. My only tip is keep it on the other side of your writing and sewing machine from your beautiful, pristine white label. But beyond that, just have a good time.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I will go ahead and share my little presentation. And Renee, thank you so much for keeping an eye on the chat. I will be happy to answer any questions anytime. And then I have some examples to show at the end. So great. Here we go. Can everyone see just the PowerPoint telling our quilt stories? Is that showing up for you?
Yes.
Yay, lovely. Well, these are just two quick photos. One is of my preferred labeling setup at the top, just with my very own PMQG label that I got from Renee and my Happy Mail. And the bottom picture is it finished on one of these collective quilts from 2012 that I mentioned. So let's get started with labeling ideas. And I can't wait to see if you've brought a special quilt and would like to share it at the end. We would be thrilled to have a show and tell of any that you're excited to show us, label, quilt, and story. So let's see. Here you go. So this is the absolute basics. And if you don't have everything with you tonight, that is no big deal. It's just these things do really make it easier. I've made several labels just out of solid fabric. So after you fall in love with labeling and have used your PMQG label, you can cut.
Okay.
So I'm going to go like this.
Okay. Good luck. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Renee, would you mind muting if anybody else is unmuted? That would be awesome. And thank you so much. So for the fabric, I recommend quilting cotton or muslin. A solid color is nice, or a quiet print that you can write over or work with for your handwriting. But it's really up to you. I like the size of the PMQG label because it's really easy to add lots of information, but it's not so big that it becomes sort of like unwieldy when you're stitching it on the back of the quilt. You'll see in this picture, I have an extra piece of fabric, and that's because this is a collective quilt that had 16 block makers. And so I wanted extra space to record everyone's name. For pens, I'll show a photo of this in like one of the next couple of slides, but I use a micron pen if you're familiar with those. It's a very affordable, like $2 or $3, and they last forever. Acid-free archival ink pen, and you can find them here in Portland at Collage or art supply stores, or really any bigger shop would probably carry them with other pens, but it's a really nice quality. I like the 05 size, but that's just my personal preference. It makes a small but very clear line. But if you have a chance to test a couple out, you should use whatever size or style you like best. And any acid-free or archival pen will work great. I really like to use a grippy back for writing, especially if you're, if you've ever tried to write on fabric with, the stops and starts, and the weave of the fabric can catch the nib of your pen and it doesn't always flow as smoothly as a piece of smooth paper. So the sandpaper really grips from behind. I use like a medium or fine grade. And freezer paper is another amazing option. You can reuse freezer paper several times. Sandpaper will last forever, just using it over and over again on different labels. But you can lightly press the freezer paper to the back of your label and it will provide that really nice stability for writing. But if you don't have those with you, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And don't, hold off until you happen to have everything just perfect to go. I like to do my labels for the most part as 2 layers. It really is nice for, especially if your quilt is a dramatic color or dark color, the fabric, especially if you are getting them printed on spoon flower like ours, you can sometimes kind of slightly see through one layer of it if it's over a dark color. So the second layer gives it a really creamy, smooth back that is very calm, easy to see the writing, and also just a stronger, more stable label and more likely to just stay on for, until you hand it down to your great grandchildren or give it to someone special. So the idea is, if you have ever had a family quilt from several generations ago that didn't have the maker's information with it and nobody can quite remember who made it or what year it was from, it's just so nice having all that information right at the quilt's bottom corner. And so someone who just is sees it for the first time can learn all about it. And especially since women's art is, and not that all of our members are women, but in many cases historically, women's art wasn't signed and quilts weren't labeled, and it's really wonderful when you can find those details out. So let's make it easy for our future generations and recipients to always know that it was made by us with love in this year in this place, and share that out. So I like to use a sewing machine and add my second layer of muslin or quilting cotton to the back with a sewing machine. You can also do it by hand, or you can skip that second layer. But what's really nice about that is that when you stitch it, and you'll see in the next few photos, it just creates a very crisp, neat line. You can also hand stitch at any time. That's completely up to you. And then last, you'll need a special quilt, because this will be one that you'll really, enjoy telling the story of and that feels special. Maybe one that you've shown at a show and tell and guild, or one that reminds you or was inspired by a workshop or a fellow guild member. So we're just really happy and thankful to have our community and be able to celebrate our creativity together. So here's what to write. Sometimes I think we've all had that blinking cursor moment where you're like, well, what should I say? Where do I even start? And so the absolute basics are listed right on your label. The quilt's name, your name, any collaborators' names, your long armer's name if you had someone else quilt it. The place, a sense of place is so special for quilt making because it really does capture something about our world. And it doesn't have to be an exact street address. It can just be Portland, Oregon, or Boston, Massachusetts, like anywhere in between, but just so there's a sense of where it is in the world and where you are in the world. The date, which could be the year, it could be the month, it could be the day that you stitch the last binding inch on. It's really up to you, but it's just so nice in this age of sort of Instagram and blogs and Flickr before everything else that we remember what year we made what. It really does kind of, it's harder to remember. Ask me how I know, as the quilt I labeled was 9 years old this week. And it's just nice having those bits of information handy. Where do you find that info? Well, I keep sketchbooks, and so I'll flip back and find the one from that year. And I usually have fabric swatches and quick notes, and I date things, but not, religiously or super in detail, but enough to kind of piece it back together. Did you share work in progress photos on Instagram, or the day you finished it? Did you take a triumphant picture? That'll be time stamped. Photos in your camera roll on your phone or your digital camera or whatever you're recording with. That'll tell you what month or what day you were working on it too. Fabric swatches, if you remember, like, oh, I bought that collection when it came out, when it was new, and that was fall 2017. That'll give you more information. Any blog posts that you made, any Facebook posts, anything that you've curated from, or other documentation you can grab. And really, it should be fun. This doesn't have to be methodical in anyone else's way. It really can be a very celebratory and fun and satisfying process. The photo here is the 3 quilts that we made with Michael Miller Fabrics, a cotton couture, which was very new at the time and very thrilling. And these are all 3 of them together when we used to meet at PNCA in Northwest Portland. So the first one on the left in the front is called Linear, and it is in the collection of Juline Bajada, who I'm hoping is here tonight. The one in the back is called Graphic, and it is in Portland Modern Quilt Guild's possession and collection. And then the one in the front on the right is called IMPROV, and I was very fortunate to receive it as a gift from its raffle winner, Elsa Randall Hart. So that one is in my collection. So just what I remember about these is not every single detail, every single date. When did we take it to Nancy Stovall for long arm quilting? I just remember the joy of sewing with these beautiful solids, and how 47 of our members created these stunning blocks, and how fun it was to be part of something like this and just see it all come together. So keep it light, have fun with it. This should not be like homework. This should be like creative and fun, and also just that check mark feeling of like, yes, I got one of them labeled. Just to share, in case this is encouraging to anyone, I've probably made 60 quilts, maybe more, counting minis, maybe 70. I never labeled any of them until 2018. And now I've labeled like 40 or 50 of them. And it is just, you just knock them out. And especially if you have everything with you and you have a few minutes, you can just write another label, then stitch 4 or 5 on, in a sew day, and just enjoy the process of that too. You can, I know you can do it. If you already label your quilts, good job. You were ahead of where I was until 3 years ago. So we're all in it together. Let's just have fun with it. And I'm so happy to be together tonight. Here's how to write it. So that's a micron pen. You may have one right next to you now, but if you haven't used one, they're very, very lightweight and easy to write with. They leave a beautiful line. This is just my very simple printing. You can see it's just a clean, nice line on fabric, and that's key. The acid-free archival element is also huge. You don't want something that's going to end up like, if the quilt gets wet, or you machine wash it, it bleeds, that would be terrible. So I would stick with something like a Micron or another brand that you prefer, but just look for the words acid for your archival. The sandpaper, as I mentioned earlier, is a great base. It's like a quarter a sheet and just really easy to use, and provides that enjoyment factor that writing on plain fabric often does not include. I recommend writing a rough draft if you've got a lot to say about this quilt. Like in this case, there were 16 block makers. It had, to me, a really special story that tells a lot of how our guilds kind of grew. And this was one of our biggest, our first biggest, kind of challenges. And just getting 8 bolts of Michael Miller solids in the mail was absolutely thrilling. So I wanted to capture just a bit of that. So you'll see what I wrote there, and we'll revisit it in a minute. But importantly, you'll want to make sure that you leave a little bit of room on all sides. You don't want to write right up until the edge of the fabric, and then some of your precious documentation disappears into the seam, or it ends up like just being harder to sew because you're trying not to obscure it. So just leave a little bit of room, and you'll be happy you did when you're sewing. So let's see. Backing your label. Does anybody have any questions so far? Any quick things you want to ask about? Great. So I recommend backing the label. I'm going to share at the end quickly a couple of ideas for if you just want to do a 1 layer, that is fine too. But this is if you want to do that sort of like second layer behind it. I just cut a piece of muslin. Lightweight is great. You don't want to use something super, super dense and heavy because it's just going to add kind of like clunk to the label. Cut it the same size. And then put them together right side spacing if your backing fabric has right side, and pin or just hold them aligned together using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is really optional. You can also trim it later, but I just kind of like to do it as a narrower than 1/4 inch, just for, because you don't want to end up with lots of bulk inside the label. It'll be harder to turn and make it smooth and neat. You'll stitch around, and I don't know if you can see my my threads at the bottom of this photo, but I left them there so you could see that's the opening I left on my label. I stitched around the perimeter and just make right angle turns, no big deal, and leave that about that much of an opening. And then once you're done, clip your corners, because you won't want to have that bulky corner to try to shove in to the finished label, and turn it right sides out. Tuck the raw edges on the bottom inside, and give it a nice press so that it's got a little bit of set and stability. Press it front and back quickly, and then make sure the corners are nice and neat. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is just, you know, kind of the way I do it is pretty quick, honestly. And it's kind of satisfying to do like 4 or 5 at a time. If you're just sitting at your sewing machine, you can knock out several once you get on the labeling train. Placing the label. This is super personal. Some people like to put them on the opposite side from what I'm suggesting. I really like to put mine on the right side of the quilt, bottom right corner, and I put them just a little in from binding. It's totally your call. You can see this one includes sort of a secondary mini label that credits every block maker. And so what I wanted to do with this was let them both kind of float, not crammed together, not like right in the, you know, just right up against each other. I just wanted them to kind of have a little bit of flow. So I pinned them in place here. As you can see, you can also just see where the pins are. You don't, this isn't going to move around much. You just need to pin it neatly, and you're good to go. What I'd suggest here is just, if you're going to hand stitch, that is a wonderful option, and it will not disturb the front of the quilt because you'll be slip stitching and not catching through. So your quilt front will look exactly like it does. If you machine stitch, you will end up with that ghostly perimeter, and that's fine too. It's really up to you. I machine stitch on quilts where it's like a large bed quilt, and I know it's going to go through the washing machine, or it's one I made for my kids that I really want the label to have a good chance of survival. But you can always hand stitch it back on. If you hand stitch your label and a few washes later it's getting loose, just give it a quick fix. That's no big deal. But it's really either is good. The great thing is that you put a label on your quilt. So for hand stitching, this is just a little shot. I know you all, if you hand bind, you're already doing this, and that's a great method, but you'll just want to slip stitch or hand stitch on your label. I do mine clockwise because I'm right-handed. It's just easier for me. You can add them in any stitches order you want. I like to start at the bottom because there is that opening, and I'll tuck my knot inside the label in the opening, so it's not kind of under the label where it could like work its way out. It's kind of tucked in and hidden away. And then I just start slip stitching, and as you go around, you can adjust the pins just slightly if the label's shifting. You just want to make it, you know, straight and neat. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just so it's kind of oriented the way that you want it and parallel with the binding. So if you had an earlier label on, like if your quilt went to Sisters Outdoor Quilt Show and you just threw on something really quick with your name and phone number and PMPG and like your email address, I would leave it. Honestly, it's just kind of nice having that like first story and then adding your more detailed story later. And I'll show you, the next slide is a very elegant example of that, with the first story being a very special one. So here is the finished quilt label. It was really nice when it was done, just looking at it, because these quilts are, you know, 9 years old, and I am so happy to finally put the block makers' names right on them, because these are ones that, you know, so many people contributed blocks to these beautiful 3 quilts. And it was just really special writing the names and remembering them. And so many of them are still active guild members now, but it's just we have so many talented folks in our guild, and our community has grown so much. It's just really nice having those moments to really celebrate the makers. And
Mhm.
it's one of my absolute favorite things about this process is just remembering those special things and really feeling like part of something bigger than just ourselves. So you'll see on the right is my 2021 label,
Mhm.
fresh from Renee. And then on the on the left over on the other side is the stitched in label that Nancy Stovall made when this quilt was going to this is our quilt improv that I was describing.
Susan,
And yeah.
there's 2 questions.
Oh,
I'm
great.
sorry to interrupt. So, can you sew on a label before quilting is one.
Mhm.
And then the other one was, do you heat set the ink writing?
Those are great questions. First, yes, you can sew it on before quilting. And if you do, you have options like, for example, Nancy's, you can see is stitched on after quilting, but it is sewn into the binding. So those are really nice having those options if you want to be more kind of like have your label disappear into the quilt as if it's part of the design rather than like a placard in an art museum, if that makes sense. Yes, you absolutely can put it on before you quilt it. And if you quilt over the label, that looks wonderful. Um, you can really do it the way that speaks to you. You can piece it into your back. You can stitch it down after quilting like Nancy did and have it be part of the binding. And you can also just have it floating like the one that I did. It's completely flexible. For heat setting, Micron pens don't need to be formally heat set, so that's completely fine. Other inks may, and I would just look at the label or the details of that product for sure. That's such a good question. I do think that if you give it a gentle heat press after finishing writing, it's a positive. It stabilizes the fabric. It makes the two layers really aligned nicely. The ink isn't going to run either way because it's such a good quality, but I think that's a great practice to get into. And especially if you're using a different brand, heat setting can always be really only be a positive. So thank you for asking that. You'll see here just I told the story quickly of the quilts on this label, and then what was really nice was, as I just mentioned, sorry to repeat, but just sharing and attributing who made these blocks because it was such a big project and it was so quick to come together and it was a really exciting time, but I didn't even have room for the last name. So I'm planning to create a file in the Portland Modern Quilt Guild Drive that will include the last names of every maker, just so it didn't end up being like a colossally huge second label. But just being able to put the names of the blocks was a really fun and satisfying moment. So let's see. Sorry, this navigation is a little funny on this PowerPoint. Here we go. So would anyone like to start working on your own quilt label now? And just adding your special details, writing your dates and names and things that are really like important to remember, or doing a first draft on paper. And I would love to just quickly tell the story for those of you who may have joined since 2012, that this was just a really fun part of our guild history and something that I'm excited to bring forward into our present, because it just was a really an absolutely beautiful collective project. So we
Susan,
initially, yeah,
have you ever seen barcodes used to scan for all the information?
that I have not. I think a QR code has started to be used on fabric that I've seen. I don't know, I haven't seen it as a quilt label, but that would be a great option for adding quite a bit of information, because you can really direct a QR code to anything like a long blog post or for example, like a file that includes like a lot of detailed photos. That would be a great way to really kind of share out immediately. And the other thing you can do is put a website name or a URL handwritten on that would not be as techy and cool, but would lead the quilt admirer right to more information. I hope that answers that question. I think the QR code is a great idea. I've also seen them cross-stitched and they're readable. because of the pixelation. So you could even embroider a QR code and test it and make sure that it's reading. But so
you-
yeah.
Excuse me. So have you tried any of the products you can put in your printer and print your label at home?
I have only done that a little, and I know several people have, and I'm hoping that I can add to our labeling blog post some more tips on that because it's something I'd like to learn more about. But you can do that. And I know with those, sometimes, especially if it's a home printer, there is a heat set process that's very important to do. And when I dye fabric or do other surface design, the heat setting is a major part of making sure that that stays really crisp and fresh. It doesn't bleed, doesn't fade out, doesn't rub off. So you'll want to make sure that with those processes that are more detailed and amazing, that you're really doing the best you can to preserve those inks. That is a great question. Okay. So in February of 2012, at this point, our guild had about 100 members roughly that year. Maybe we got up to 120 by the end of the year. So we're about half or a third the size we are now. Kathy Miller of Michael Miller Fabrics was in Portland, and she came to speak at our February meeting, and she surprised our guild with a cotton couture color card for every single member who was there that night. And it was so fun because so many of us had never had a color card before, and it's such a beautiful fabric to sew with. It's very lightweight, very silky. It's like if you've used it, it's just a lighter weight quilting cotton, but it's very versatile and it has a beautiful hand. So we got these lovely color cards, and everyone got to bring them home and just like play with them. And the fabrics were brand new at that point. The cotton couture had just come out that same few months. So our board was so lucky to be invited by Kathy. I was president that year, and our board was myself, Heather Davidson was vice president, Petra Anderson was secretary, Nancy Stovall was our treasurer, and Allie Clock was our programs coordinator. So we got together and we picked out 8 colors, and they shipped us bolts, and we had a long night of cutting at Nancy's studio for just quilting. And we surprised everyone at the March 2012 meeting with this little adorable bag of folded fat 8s in these colors. So it was a really fun surprise to say, guess what? We're going to be making challenge blocks with these beautiful cotton couture fabrics. And you can see in the bottom corner, there were some I made a little set of pennants, and Heather and Petra each made an improv block with our scraps. Because when we cut the fat 8s, we ended up with these small end pieces that we got to play with just for fun. So that was a great evening and a really fun kind of creative challenge. Our next meeting in April, we got back 47 blocks. So you can see them all taped up on the wall. It was such a fun, beautiful display, and really nice to see them all together. Everyone kept saying it feels like we're in an art gallery. So that was a really great feeling, just seeing how many amazing, very different designs people came up with. So we ended up with 47 of them. And we thought, how are we ever going to choose? What are we going to do to turn this into one quilt? We'll have to have Kathy Miller, choose her 12 or 16 favorites, and then we'll make those into a quilt. Well, she couldn't choose. She just wrote us back and said, they're all beautiful. I don't even know what to say. This is, so lovely to just see our fabrics being used together like this. So as you'll see on this May 2012 blog post by Petra, we ended up making a design as a board. We collectively sorted them into 3 different kind of directions, and we called them graphic, improv, and linear. So graphic is the one that is, you can see a piece of in that photo. And Kathy Miller, once we made them into 3 quilt tops, she did choose that one for their quilt market booth, which was very exciting. It was in Kansas City that year. And so quilt went straight out there, and it hung in the Michael Miller booth to premiere cotton couture. So that was really cool. Anyway, and then the second one, Improv, showed at Sisters that year, 2012, in our first ever Portland Modern Quilt Guild special exhibit, which was really fun. And plot twist. And then Linear went to Northwest Quilting Expo that year. So I would love to quickly show you a peek at each of them. Improv is the one that I labeled, which you've seen lots of photos of at this point. We were auditioning sashing colors on our blog, and we're like, what color would go? Orange, tangerine, clementine. And we got the resounding response that sashing was not modern. So we skipped the sashing on that one, the only one of the three that doesn't have it. So it's smaller than the other two. Nancy quilted it with a beautiful overlapping circles design. I got her to quilt one of my quilts years later with the same pattern because it just really felt like such a special one. When it showed at Sisters, wouldn't you know, it was the first and only year they've ever had torrential rain close down the show. And so Petra and I were volunteering at our special exhibit to say hi to people and describe our guild and kind of just have that ambassador role. And instead, we raced to grab all 40 quilts out of our area and bring them to safety in the shop nearby. So that was pretty memorable. And then in December, we held a raffle with $10 tickets to raise money for Bradley Engel and Children's Relief Nursery. We raised over $500, which was so exciting. And Elsa Hart won it in our raffle. And the following year, she surprised me with it as a gift, which I think I'm not going to cry, but I might. So sorry in advance if I end up like needing a minute. It was just a really lovely surprise. And I kind of still can't believe that I own this quilt. It was such a special part of my guild's life. So that is Improv. I think you know lots about it now. Graphic is the one that I'm going to label tonight when I finally stop talking. It was the one that Kathy chose for their booth. And we were all so proud that our quilt went to Quilt Market and was part of the industry, the biggest industry event in the country. And then it was sashed with Meadow, which is the green color that you see. I thought it would turn out so beautiful. I do like sashing and sometimes. Nancy quilted it with straight lines because we were in a hurry. We had to get this quilt done so fast to get out the door to Kansas City. And then we asked our members to please vote on the 3 finished quilt tops and quilts and which one we should send in as our Guild B application for the first ever QuiltCon in 2013. This is the landslide winner with 130 votes. Our members wanted graphic. And so that's the one that we applied. And it went to QuiltCon, and it was such a joy to see it hanging there just with every other beautiful bee quilt. It was just a really nice feeling. I do need to ask, in case you happen to be seeing this amazing creative block maker, the one up in the upper right-hand corner didn't have a name on it. And we tried to find the maker at the time, but it was just, we couldn't track her down. And so if you happen to recognize it, if it jumps out at you, just let us know. I have that space in the labels blank. So I'm just waiting to find out whose it is so I can credit her and that we can complete it. But anyway, so graphic is just like one of those, it just stops you in your tracks, I think, because it has so much life to it. So this is one that we all just really, I think it just had the most immediate response, and it is still in PMQG's collection. We own it collectively as a guild. It doesn't have one owner, it's ours. Linear, this is the third one. To me, like these all seemed so in a geometric linear way. There's so much movement, but it's just all very like straight lines and like just sort of this like almost like a grid feel. We sashed it with fog, which seemed to kind of let those really sharp, strong lines really flow without too much interference. It exhibited at the 2012 Northwest Quilting Expo. Improv was next to it. This picture is so nice because we just were all so excited to see each other. And what's hilarious is that little toddler I'm holding is now in 7th grade. But we were really happy to just see our work. And one of the things that was really wonderful that year, we felt so proud, is that that was also the first year that Northwest Quilting Expo invited us to do a special exhibit. So you can see other members' quilts right on the other side. And then the picture on the right is all 3 quilts together at our December 2012 meeting, right before we raffled 2 of them off. So that was the only time the 3 of them have really been together like that until this week. So here are my other label tips. This is kind of simplified. If anybody has any questions, I'm so happy to go over anything in more detail. On the left, you'll see this is 2 layers. The perimeter has been stitched and then flipped. I don't know if you ever use the term stitch and flip, but it suits. And it's pinned on. Unless you're worried about poking yourself with a pin, you can pin your label on and leave it. If you have like a work in progress pile, or you can put it somewhere out of the way, put the label and the quilt together. Even if you don't have time to stitch them, you could use a safety pin through the binding, just anything so that they don't end up getting separated in your sewing room and your beautiful label and beautiful quilt are lost from each other for, just a sad separation. The second one is the same exact way that I described, except for it's machine stitched instead of hand slip stitch down. You'll notice I actually hand dyed that label. These are my personal labels from my book called Sew and Quilt, and then my West Coast Crafty blog I've had for a long time. I hand dye labels just for fun sometimes, but only labels that are going to be on wall quilts that aren't going to go through a washing machine, just because dyes are amazing, but they may bleed and you just don't want that to happen to something special. So for a bed quilt or something that's going to be used a lot, like a throw that's may end up in the washing machine, I wouldn't hand dye a label unless you're very, very confident in your dye. And if you are, then hand dye the heck out of everything. The second one, from the right, where it says 2 layers perimeter stitch flipped and fused, I can actually show this in a minute. I have it next to me, but this is if you use a good quality interfacing that is fusible and you use that instead of a muslin back. You'll stitch them right sides together, meaning the fusible side against your written side of your label, stitch them the same way, flip them around, and then press with a warm iron so that it fuses. This is just for wall quilts and just for something where if in 80 years it's yellowed, it's not going to bother you. It is fast and it doesn't leave any mark on the front. So that's a asterisk one, I guess, but it is useful if you have a wall quilt. Last is the same as I just showed you, hand stitched on for a fancy touch, doesn't show on the front, just a very simplified version, but another one that I hand dyed, which I actually also have right next to me, because it's a wall quilt. It's just one block that I made and just decided I'd rather look at it on the wall than have it sit in a pile, never becoming a bed quilt. I don't know if you've had those moments. Let me see. So my last tip is if you want to do a 1-layer label, if you don't have extra fabric, if you just want to keep it simple, that is a great option. Just clip your corners, press each side to the back, and you machine stitch it down. Pinning it in place definitely makes it a lot easier, especially since it doesn't have a back and it doesn't have that sort of like solid kind of steady back. You'll want it to really stay where you want it via pins. And then you can piece your label right into the quilt block, as we were chatting about earlier, tuck it into binding. And then I have some more of one of our gracious members shared some photos of her labels, which are stunning, which I'd love to show you in just a minute in the next
Susan?
slide. Yeah.
Is there a brand you recommend for fusible?
I often use Pellin. And I think other brands can be great too. I use a lighter weight. You don't want to use a heavy interfacing that's going to add a lot of like kind of crisp heaviness to the back of your quilt. You'll want it to just kind of be as fluid as the quilted 3-layer, cotton and binding. But I think Pellin makes a really good product. I don't know if there are any acid-free interfacings and fusibles. I have not. This has only been on for 2 years, but I haven't seen any yellowing yet. So that's a good thing. So I'd use a lighter weight Pellin or another good brand that you've had success with in another project. So here are Juline's really beautiful labels. If you know Juline, you know that she makes very special quilts as gifts. And you can see she has a printed one in the top left. So Juline, if you're here, maybe you can give us some tips, but it's really beautifully integrated into the back. And then her embroidered labels are beautiful and just a really elevated way to tell that quilt's story of who it's a gift for and what maybe just speaks to her in her creativity as, thinking of her gift recipients or who or what it's in honor of. So I really like how she uses her handwriting. I've had a couple friends mention that they don't like their handwriting, and that's completely okay. You can print, or just like do any kind of writing that you prefer. But especially if it's a gift for someone or if it's for someone in your family, even if you don't like your writing, they will. It's completely up to you, but don't stress it. This should be fun and this should be satisfying. So I'm hoping Juline, if she is not here, will entertain our burning questions about her amazing process.
Can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi.
Yay, we're here.
No,
Juline.
yeah. The one on the top left is one I did on the computer, but because it's a wall quilt. So I do that sometimes with quilts that aren't going to be washed a ton. But pretty much, yeah, I just think about what I want on the label as I'm making the quilt. And it doesn't usually come up with, I don't usually come up with great words to say. I just usually just put the basic information, but how I'm going to put it on is usually the big deal. I like the corners because I can tag it into the binding and it could go last. Otherwise, I have to incorporate it into the back. That's it. They're pretty self-explanatory, I think, if you look at the pictures.
Yeah, I really love how you integrated the curved one in the center bottom with inchworm. Your curved label is really elegant juxtaposition.
It was the other side was a drunkard's path, I think. Yeah. So I just had that left over from cutting out of my scrap.
Oh, that's great. And your embroidery is really nice. I love how the white over the blue is really striking and fresh.
Thanks.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, if we have any more questions for Juline, I would love to hear any other, thoughts or tips that you have to share.
This is Deb. I wanted to know from Juline if talk more about her embroidered, the one on the top right. Did she yeah, did you do that before you put it on the back?
Yeah, it's just a piece back. So I just stitched on one of the square. I mean, I don't think I have a picture of the whole back of it. But I just stitched that on a block and then incorporated it into the back.
Okay, all right, because I was wondering, if you made a mistake after it's all done, that's
right. Yeah. Plus, sometimes I forget when I'm doing that not to go all the way through.
It's beautiful. The bottom right, no, the bottom left is what I've been doing, and I really like those corner.
Yeah, I do
when
too.
They're in the they look good, and plus when they're in the binding, they look good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Juline, there's one more question.
Yeah.
So for the corners, do you hand stitch the edges and not in the binding?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. You can see the one on the bottom right, I used a buttonhole just to match, just kind of go with the whole theme of the quilt. But on the one on the left, I just did a blind stitch on the edge.
And Juline, I was just wondering, do you have a recommendation for the printer? I've used a product, I cannot remember the name right now, but that stiffens fabric so you can run fabric through your printer. Do you have a suggestion for if people do want to do like a really beautifully printed label? Did you use your home printer or?
I did. I just put the
products?
fabric on freezer paper
Oh, great.
and taped because usually I'm dealing with scraps of things. So I taped the scrap to a piece of computer paper with the fabric on it.
Oh, great. Yeah, it looks beautiful. And it's nice too, because I feel like it's so simple, but it just has such a clean, pretty look.
Yeah, and I just like the different fonts. Like I used a printer, I printed the top right label, I printed that on the printer onto the dissolvable stuff.
Mhm.
So it prints on this sticky mesh thing, and then you stick it on your fabric and embroider over the font. And then when it hits water, it dissolves. So you
Oh,
can run those. Those are meant for your printer. So I can get all kinds of fonts that way. And does that make sense?
yeah, that's great.
Excuse
Yeah,
me.
when we have a moment later, I'll add some of these tips to the blog post, which is going to live on the Portland Modern Quilt Guild site as the site URL, portlandmodernquiltguild.com/labels. So I'll update the post to include some of these tips on some special embroidery or printing options, just other ways that we could just kind of like demystify and share recommendations for this, because it's so helpful.
I would love to know what you buy that dissolves well, that you can print through the printer. Because I have lots of things that I embroider with that dissolves, but I don't have anything that you can put through the printer. That's kind of amazing.
I'll find it and put a link in the chat.
Oh yeah, that'd be so great. Thank you. I can show you some things that I've done.
Oh,
If you want to see
great.
it.
That would be lovely, Angie. Hang on just one second. Let me get to the next slide and invite you to share your quilt story, starting with you. That would be awesome.
Okay,
It
let's
would
see
be
if I can.
anybody who would like to show the quilt you're labeling, hold up your label, show us the quilt. It doesn't have to be finished and stitched down, but it would just be so nice to see what other people are working on. I'll stop sharing and
Hi.
here we go. Hi.
Okay. So this kind of started this summer when I was looking around at things to do because I was home, and I was like, oh, I have all these quilts just like you. I don't make that many quilts, so I don't have 60 or 70 quilts that needed labels on them. But I hadn't labeled any of my quilts either. I think I even gave a bunch away without labels on them, which is really not a good idea. But anyway, so this summer, my daughter said, so my mother-in-law made her a quilt that she really wanted. Can you see that? I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, okay. So, and she hand wrote on the back of it without heat setting it first. And so it was fading, and my daughter came to me and said, oh no, it's fading. So then I thought, oh, it's so lovely, the handwriting from her grandmother. So I just embroidered her handwriting, which, you know, was super sweet. It's not a lot to write, so it was really easy to embroider.
Mhm.
So I had to take the whole block off and then embroider it. But it was really special to her because it had, can you see it? I don't know if you can see it. Is that better?
Yeah,
you
that
see
looks great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very detailed.
Okay, good. Yeah, so what was sweet was her handwriting. So I did that. And then when I did that, I was like, I can do that for myself. So I made this one, and this one's based on the Black Lives Matter embroidery thing that we did, because I made a label for my Black Lives Matter quilt. And then I thought, oh, I'm gonna make a label for a quilt out of that too. So I hand wrote this. And so what I did was I actually used pen, and I wrote it by hand, and then I just embroidered over it. And you can't see the pen because it's black, you know, thread over black ink. Does that make sense? You see that? I don't know if you guys can see it. Maybe I can turn this around somehow.
Yeah, it's
Oh, here
beautiful.
we go. Switch
I love
Yeah,
that.
those look great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah, so it's kind of fun to embroider if you don't have a lot to write. But I think that the next one that I do that has a story, I'm going to handwrite it like you did, Susan. So I'd really love to know, like, the micron pen. For example, I think this one was done in micron pen and then it started to fade. So heat setting it, I guess, helps. I don't know, because I have some things that I want to write on and I don't want to embroider them.
Yeah, I think heat setting would be a great option. I'm so glad that you were able to revitalize that and the precious handwriting, because it really is such a special, it's like a fingerprint. It's so
Yeah.
unique and beautiful. But I love that you resurrected it with embroidery, and that the heat setting is always going to help. I mean, it'll, even if it's the ink is going to be stable, it will just like the fabric will, with heat and smoothness, the fabric will be just a better kind of long-term, part of your quilt, as opposed to, just kind of not pressing it and having it just kind of go on a little crooked or a little bunchy and just not sitting right with the rest of the quilt, if that makes sense. So I think ironing is a really positive part of this whole process.
So do you have some tips for Susan for the best tips for heat setting?
I would just, what I do is I press my label when I finish writing it, just like not a heavy, long heat set, but just more of like a warm or, like a appropriate iron, like cotton setting. And I just iron the label itself just so that it's really smooth and the ink is, gets that extra layer of just protection or set. And then when I stitch it to the backing, if it's muslin or fusible, right sides together, after I turn it, I press it again really well. And it's kind of a satisfying feeling because you're tucking the raw edges in at the bottom. If you've backed it, or wherever your raw edges are. Like, for example, if you're doing a corner label, which is such a cool idea, I really like them. You can have those raw edges just go right into the binding, and you wouldn't need to have that, kind of turning it all with a small opening. It could be more concealed within your binding, but there's really something nice about kind of doing these steps, because your hope is that somebody's going to use this quilt, whether it's you or it's a gift for someone, and the label is going to wear just as well as the quilt. So everything you can do to preserve it, I would do, and not in a fanatical way. This is supposed to be creative and fun, but it really does feel good to look at your quilts and see their labels and remember the best parts of it. Does anybody else have a quilt or a label they'd like to share from tonight or from earlier? I'd love to see what you've chosen to use your PMPG label on if you'd like to show us the quilt.
I have a quilt that I have a label on. It's not your label.
Oh,
Can you
great.
hear me? Oh, okay. I just figured out how to reverse my camera so I don't have to, so I can see what I'm shooting. Okay. No matter how much I press, it's not activating. Oh, I guess I will have to turn it around. So you'll have to tell me if I'm getting it. So I guess you're spotlighted. Are you spotlighted?
I'm seeing your screen as the primary one as a speaker view.
Oh, okay. Because
Yeah.
I'm still seeing yours. Is that in this frame? Can you see it?
Now
Can you?
I'm seeing just your like your screen, like your profile icon, like your video went
Okay.
off.
I press so. I go back. Back to meeting. Okay, I'm back. I must have pressed something. Okay, is it in the frame? Okay, so that's with an inkjet printer on some hand dyed fabric that I hand stitched to the back, and it's from 2013. So it's not something that's washed. It's a wall quilt, but it's lasted pretty good. What I like about printing it is that someone mentioned that they don't like their handwriting. Well, you can use a fancy font, a script or whatever, and adjust it so it's bolder and really make it stand out.
I'm not seeing a label.
Oh,
Yeah,
because you want to shoot it again? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's reversed so that we're seeing like the wall or what's behind. If you don't mind showing us again, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so is it in my frame now?
I'm seeing your fingers.
Okay. Then that button must have worked, and I just don't know it. Okay, let me get it back to reverse my camera. It's hard for me to tell because all I'm seeing is everybody else. There we go. Whoops. Okay, now I can see as well as you.
There we go.
Yeah. So
Perfect.
as you can see, I bolded the font, and it's a nice script. So if you don't like your handwriting, it's a perfect way to do a label. And that was just on an inkjet printer on some hand dye. You can't see the hand dye because it's so bright in here. Nope, can't see the hand dye. It's just onion dye.
That's great. You picked a great font too.
Yeah, I don't remember what that is. I'd have to go and rediscover it. But that's just, I used the freezer paper just like someone else was describing. And since it was a small scrap of fabric, I didn't have to worry about it getting caught on the edges.
Great. Thank you so much for showing us.
Carol Stanley, you had your hand up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to see your quilt too, Carol.
So some of my friends and I had an opportunity to be involved in a special thing down in Houston a few years ago. So one of my friends loves using her embroidery attachment. So it's like, you go, girl. So she sends us all these like, is this okay? And so she sends us a sample. And then once we approve it, she sends us the final one that we can just really sew on our quilt. And it's, again, you don't have to worry about how messy your handwriting is because she's done everything for us. So it's really, it's quite nice to have a really good friend that will do that for you. So that was nice. And then I have another label from a friend. We did it again. We worked on a quilt that took us basically a year. We each did our own quilt. It's the soul searching one. It was a really great bonding experience with sharing fabrics and all that. So, but I have to ask her, I haven't put this, so here's the quilt label she's given me. It's massive. But it's printed on a paper. It's quite a heavy backing. So I'm not sure now, just looking at it, I just assumed that I would just stitch it on. I absolutely love your idea about doing it with the backing and flipping it over, because I've been sitting on this for like 6 months, not knowing what to do with it. So I think I will use your method, Susan. I thought that was great. Really good. But I think I'll cut it down a bit. It's quite big.
Great. I love how it really has such presence. That will
Yeah.
look great when it's integrated into the quilt.
Yeah, it makes a statement. It's really cool. And so she, it's all like, it's fun having friends that look at things differently. So like, do you want like black writing on a white background? Do you want a black background? And it's just kind of fun to see what people come up with that you wouldn't necessarily think of doing yourself. So it's fun. But I've gotten a lot from tonight. This has been great.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'd love to see more quilts. If anybody would like a really quick look at the fusible version, I have it. Can I just show that quickly? I won't take time because I've already kind of described it. But this is a mini I made. It's from my book Sew and Quilt, which came out in 2019. And I just have this on the wall because it's small. And as you can see, there are no stitch lines because this is just fused on, and it's on pretty well. I mean, you could pull it off and stitch it down if it was starting to peel, or if you wanted to remove the fusible, but sorry, it's kind of dark. I just want to show that it has some stability, but it's not going to be the strong join of stitching. So this is really great for a wall quilt or something that is not going to be handled. But it's also very fast. So just a quick recommendation for something, if you have something like that. I also have used a few Dutch label tags on wall quilts where they don't have tons of story, or I wrote about them in my sketchbook, but I don't need to tell like every detail, and they're small. I'll just fuse or sew a small tag on with just my West Coast Crafty blog name. And it just feels like I've signed it quickly. It's not as detailed, but it's just one option for a small project or a gift or, you know, something like a zipper bag where you didn't necessarily need like a big label with a lot of extras.
Susan, can I ask again real quickly, why is it you double it, you make a line? Is that just to give it extra body, or when
Yeah,
you sew it
really,
on?
I like the double because if you've ever used like a muslin or a lightweight white or light fabric over dark, I mean, this is just totally personal preference. A layer label is great. It's so much better than no label. It's just, it's faster. It uses less fabric. The one reason I do really like a double layer, for one thing, is that it really creates a very solid and smooth background for your handwritten or printed label, that it's not going to show through. Like, for example, I don't have it in front of me, but I have one that I did a 1-layer label on, and you can see just around the perimeter. I'll just grab a different quilt. Sorry, this is taking a second, but just to show you, the 2-layer really creates, this is like a really busy back. I brought it, sorry, this quilt is absolutely enormous, so excuse me while I like feel around for the corner. I used a vintage sheet on this quilt's back. I showed this at Guild last month, actually, if you happen to see it, but you could see where if it was just 1 layer, you might really see that kind of heavy, deep pattern showing through because it's very dynamic. Or if you have a very dark back of your quilt, like a black, charcoal gray, like a navy blue, like something you can actually see often both through the middle. You may see just that slight kind of window pane effect. And you probably will, if there's a high contrast, you will see that 1/4 inch fold will look darker and more like solid and white. And inside, where there's not the small fold under, you probably will see some of your backing fabric kind of just lightly show through like a shadow. So it's so personal though. If you have a quilt that you're wondering about, just set the label down on it before you even bother with a second backing and see if you can see through it. And if you can't, just do it your way. That's totally your call. But does that make sense? Just kind of a little bit of stability and a little bit of kind of smooth, solid color instead of transparency.
Well, thank you. I was going to show you real quick. I've been using the inkjet thing to make the quilt, to make the labels, and it's so thick, even after it's been washed, that I started coordinating fabric around the edge to give me something to sew to that doesn't kill my fingers because my arthritis gets bad. But I'm going to try the handwritten ones now. That looks like fun. Looks like I can do more.
Oh, great. I hope that you enjoy it. It's very personal and very fun. I think printed ones are stunning.
Everybody's frozen.
There's something nice about just holding the pen and like telling the story. But I think both are really lovely, and Juline's examples and Angie's examples are both so inspiring. Marika, I saw you had something.
Yeah.
Cool.
So this is one that I just finished. I don't know. Can you see it? I'm trying to. So what I have started doing is adding washing instructions to my labels, particularly for gift quilts. I had a friend who I gave a baby quilt to a while back, and their kid was like 4 years old, and we were at a party, and he was like, "So can I wash that?" And I was like, "Yes, please." That's gross that your kid's been playing on this quilt for 4 years and you haven't washed it. So then I was like, okay, people think that they can't wash quilts. I need to tell them that, yes, they can. So this one says, made for Dylan Vokes by Aunt Marika, Oregon, 2021, machine wash cold, tumble dry warm. And I always like to wash my quilts before I gift them so that any shrinkage will happen. And this one I'm actually planning, the spring in my walking foot is funky and there's a lot of puckers. So I'm gonna actually wash it on hot before I gift it so that it like really all of the quilting sins will come out. So yeah. And then I'm gonna use my my PMQG label on this cotton and steel quilt that I just got back from Cheryl that was a swap quilt. So let's see if I can hold it up, that I'm getting the binding on. But this was a swap quilt with not just PMQG folks, but a bunch of PMQG folks. So I figured that's the right label to, or right quilt to use that label for. So.
Oh, that's awesome. It's gonna look so nice with that, and kind of like with your, like, it's such a beauty. I saw your Instagram photo and was like, love that quilt. So that will be such a celebratory one. With the
It'll be
PMQ
fun.
one.
My kiddo, when I got it back from the quilter, she like refused. I was like, it doesn't have binding on it yet. Get off the quilt. And she was like, no, this is mine. And I was like, it's not. It's my quilt. I'll share it with you, but it's my quilt. So.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, I did want to mention one more thing. I'd love to see more quilts, but just as an aside, one thing I've started doing is labeling quilts that I have that I didn't make. If I like, I bought one at a senior center in Austin when I was at the first Quilt Con, and I just have the woman's name, and you know, I don't know her personally, but I am putting together a really simple label because it's a great quilt. It's actually in here, I think. And it's just, you know, I didn't make it, I just bought it and like fell in love with it. And so if you have a family quilt, or you you know, were bought a quilt or were given a quilt as a gift, and you want to add a simple label with the maker's name and any other details or how you got it, like if you found it at a thrift store, a yard sale, or a consignment store, just, you know, giving it that same respect that you give your own work is a really nice way to kind of just make its story complete, and kind of share how it came into your life.
So I guess I'll share. I'm a pretty new quilter. I kind of self-taught myself. I'm teaching myself in quarantine times. But I did make a wall hanging with my daughter over Christmas. It's just this little like Christmas tree wall hanging, and it's the first quilt that I made all the way through, and that I pieced, and I actually put a backing, and I quilted on my machine, and I did a binding. So it was my first time that I did that. So I had like, people had talked about labels, I just didn't have a lot of good information on them. So I can tell you what I did just off the fly. I actually had gotten these labels on Etsy, and it's one where I can put my name and print it. I don't know if you can see that, but it says made with love, not perfection, which seemed good for me with my name. But the one thing I don't like about the label is I don't have any room to put anything else. So I just, on the backing before I quilted it, or before I put the backing on quilted, I just like tacked it down with a zigzag stitch, but looking at it, I don't know, it's not my favorite. And then I just wrote, I had fabric markers, probably not the best thing, but my daughter helped me with it. So I put her name and the year. But like, if I was thinking about, maybe I would just add a little label here now with the story behind it, just that it's the first one we made together, because she's getting into it with me, she's 8. Anyway. So that was kind of my thing. And then it got quilted in. So that is something you can sometimes find this on Etsy. So I did have this pack of label, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with these. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I'll just guess.
Amber, the project is lovely.
That's awesome. I love that your daughter worked on it with you too. It's really special.
Yeah.
And also that slogan, made with love, not perfection, is really relatable. I was wondering if anybody would like a really quick look. I keep sketchbooks, and I know when I spoke at Guild, which has now been, gosh, yes, 2 years ago, quarantine COVID feels like so long, I can't even really remember, but I just thought I'd show like a page of a quilt, you know, just with fabric swatches and stuff, if that's okay. I tend to, well, I have 2 kids, and so they're both not, well, they're now 10 and 12, but when they were younger, I would get the opportunity to take classes and be so excited. And then the blocks would just sit in a, in a bag or a box, and I didn't get to finish them even that year, even that decade. So I just want to show one. This is an entry from 2020, but I have the old one from, this was from July 2011. It was a Denise Schmidt class that I took. And when I was trimming my blocks after, 8 or 9 years, I saved the little scraps. And this is just a method I wanted to recommend. If you're interested, if you like fabric scraps, I really love them. And if you have these little pieces left over, I'll take a piece of the sashing or background fabric, something, or just a solid that doesn't interfere. And I'll just stitch down these little pieces and then staple it in. So I just have this record. This is another one that was from a Denise Schmidt class. I took 4 of her classes in 4 years, and then I didn't finish any of the quilts until 2020. So it's a little, it's kind of complex in a way, but it's also like, this is the one that I just showed the label up called Wow, It's Really Green. It's just some of the green fabrics, but I don't usually record, like, unless I'm writing a pattern to publish, I don't usually record the size. And on my label, I'd never write like, 80 by 80, just because I feel like that's not the interesting part. But you can, if that's something that's important to you to be accurate with, or you want to share that, I think that's wonderful. But I tend to write a little bit more about what inspired me, what fabrics I used, where I took the class, stuff like that. But everyone, should do it their own way. I love seeing more and more quilts getting labeled, because it's just, everyone has their, really great methods or interesting ideas. And, I learned a lot about the printed label possibilities tonight. So I really appreciate Juline and Angie, you're both sharing out that information, because it's something I've always wanted to try, but I find myself in my little analog handwriting and staple world.
Yeah, I mean, I only thought of it because my daughter was upset that she was going to lose her grandma's handwriting. And then I was like, oh, I could embroider it. And it turned out to be so easy that I was like, I'm going to do that all the time. It's great because it has a kind of personal handwriting in it, It's really sweet. So I took the class, Cotton and Bourbon. I cannot remember her name. And it was important to, I felt like it was really important to keep track of the colors, because the whole thing is about, making a watercolor. I don't know if you can see that.
I took that class with you.
Yeah, that's right, Carol. I remember that. Anyway, she said to make these cards of the colors and then say what they are. So I started using, I always have a sample of my fabrics, and then I number them according to the pattern I'm using, but I had never kept a track of the names of the colors. And then she said that that's what she does. And I thought, what a great idea, because there is no way. I mean, I use scrap fabric. I'm not using Kona color every time, So I thought, what a great way to keep track of that hue change. Like, let's say that some of it's Kona and some of it's, a different solid company, a Moda or something like that. Anyway, so I've been writing what solid it is, but then I used a bunch of Ruby Star and Cotton and Steel in this, and I'm not going to be able to replace that, but I needed to say what it was. So I actually keep the receipt on the back of where I bought the fabric because the receipt says what kind of fabric it is. I don't know. I thought it was a good idea. Anyway,
That's
so I have lots of these.
Especially
Yeah,
if you make a cousin quilt later that uses some of those same fabrics, and you don't want to forget, because it's just really nice having that detail. That's awesome.
Yes, and you never know. Fabrics come back. People get rid of stashes on Etsy. You might find it someday.
I have found things on Etsy, and I've also found things that are out of print and were highly desirable by doing the is it declutter your stash? I can't remember the hashtag, Susan. Maybe you remember. Sometimes there's an Instagram hashtag of people who like like fulfill your quilty dreams kind of thing. And then you can, you know the name of the fabric that you can't find anywhere, and you put it up on Instagram and someone will have it and send it to you. It's amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I think there's a search engine that you can search by picture. So if you shot a picture of the fabric and it had a particular print, you could find it that way.
Well, you can do that with Google image search, but that would not work on something that's speckled. There's no way that it would find that,
Yeah,
it has to be a print.
distinctive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a question in the chat. Carol's just asking who buys from brick and mortar or online. And I saw Juline saying that she doesn't like buying online. She likes to see the fabric. And I agree. I really like to see or touch the fabric if I can. And these days that can be more challenging. But, several of our local shops, like in the Portland area, Cool Cottons and the Cotton Cure have you can order online and pick it up, or you can look online and then they'll, I bought some of my pearl cotton from Cotton Cure, and Marianne was amazing and like talked me through which colors they had so that I could make the order with, even ones that weren't on their website yet. So I feel like the more I can make it as, as personal and supporting local shops as possible, I love that. But it's hard when we have had such a rough year for in-person anything. Does anybody else have any favorite in-person shops in Portland or other places? I know not all of our members are in Oregon, which is very exciting.
I go to Modern Domestic, and then sometimes I'll see something and then they don't have it anymore. So I'll search online and buy it that way. But I never buy from fabric.com. I usually do it from Etsy or the Hawthorne. It's not a Hawthorne store. It's actually called Hawthorne something, Fat Quarter or something like that. Yeah, Hawthorne Threads. That's it. Yeah.
I really like Fabric Bub for online stuff. She's got all of the modern things. She's like always in stock with all of the Kona, like she has a whole like Kona room in her space. It's all online. Like she has a studio where she holds all the fabric, but she doesn't, even pre-pandemic, it was just an online only business, but she'll share Instagram stories of like their Kona room, and it's great. And then she's got all the modern stuff, and she's super fast. They're up in Seattle, but I ordered fabric on like a Thursday and I got it on the next, like 2 days later on Saturday or something.
So who is this? What's her name?
Fabric Bub.
Okay.
BUBB. She's on Instagram and
Instagram. That's great.
But then, I mean, she's got a very robust website that I feel like is more searchable than some of the other websites. I really like Cool Cottons. And pre-pandemic, that was my absolute favorite fabric store. And I love to support Marie, but their website is a little clunky to navigate. Like if you know exactly what you're looking for, you can usually find it, but it's kind of hard to like browse. So
yeah, I totally agree. I think it's an older site design, but if you call, she or Linda can help you.
Yeah.
But for solids, for example, it's just difficult to navigate. If you want like, even by brand, it's really is nice. So if you get one of them on the phone and they're like, oh, well, we have this much of this, and it's like, sold.
I just bought background fabric for one of mine, and when I picked up an order and I dropped off a couple of my blocks, and Marie took them inside. I just loaned her my block, and she pulled out all these options and sent me pictures of different options.
Great.
Yeah. So
I love
she could tell me which, and so she told me in the email what picture was which color name and everything. So that was really helpful. That was her idea.
It's nice when the bricks and mortar store that you used before does a good job online. Stone Mountain Daughter in Berkeley, California, they do an excellent job of photographing their fabrics, and it's really easy. The other thing is that if you are experienced with a particular line, like oh, Liberty, you know that you like that particular fabric, and if you can trust the color on your screen, it's a little bit easier than on some sites don't do a good job at all photographing their fabric, but if they have staff that can answer the phone, then you could ask them questions about it.
Yeah, I love Liberty, and it is nice if you have, some of the, the yardage already or scraps. You get such vivid color, and it can photograph differently online, but it's unmatched in person. It's so fun seeing it. I am so excited that we got to hang out and work on quilt labels together. I would love to, if you don't mind, we are hoping to do a short recap at the March meeting, because I know, for one thing, starting earlier, the Quilter Filter has always been such a nice event, but it's usually kind of a smaller group, and we recorded this to the cloud. So I wanted to make sure, I know we mentioned it at the beginning, but some people may have joined after we mentioned that. As long as you're okay with that, we're going to make this a private video just for members to see, and an unlisted link on YouTube. But there's just so much good recommendations and information. I'd be really appreciative if y'all are all okay with it being shared just with our other members who weren't able to join. Great. And then we're going to do a short recap for next week's meeting, a week from tonight. I hope you'll all be able to make it. It will be at 7 o'clock, not the 6 o'clock start, which I know is a little tricky sometimes with work, dinner, and any other things you have going on. But I'd love to do a very short recap. And if any of you have anything that you especially liked, or that was fun, or a photo to share, if you do add your PMPG label, or a label like Juline has already graciously given us permission to share some of hers, I'd love to do 1 or 2 slides in our meeting next week, just sharing that this recording's available. That was so fun hearing from other members. But if you have anything you'd like to share as a visual or a tip, or something that clicked with you that you thought was helpful, that would be wonderful to make it more personal. So please email the Guild, just the main email address, and I'll see it. But I really appreciate everyone sharing what you are working on or what you've been excited about. It just makes all the difference, just getting to connect and have, such a special community with all of us, on a screen or in person. It means a lot. But yeah, any last questions or thoughts?
I just enjoyed seeing the creativity in the label. I never thought of extending the creativity of the quilt to the back side beyond the back fabric, but it's kind of nice to see so much work going into the label.
Yeah, I agree. It's really nice. And it's so cool to see the corner labels and the printed labels and the embroidered labels. There's just so much diversity in how people work with the information. And I've kind of gotten sucked into my little process of just handwriting and making it very straightforward, but also just sort of enjoying how simple it is. It's kind of like if you go to a coffee shop that has someone's art up, or an art gallery, and see the placard. I love knowing more. And so when other people label their quilts, I'm always very excited to see what they said. Thank you all so much for joining. I hope I'll see you next week.
Susan.
Carol, enjoy your later evening and glass of wine. I'll be joining you soon.